Anna Petz, thank you so much for joining us today. So Anna is the Program Coordinator for the Geological Survey of South Australia, and she'll be giving us some updates on what they've been up to over there. And the second half of the talk, they'll be focusing on the Gawler Ultrafine Plus collaboration that they've been working on with the CSIRO. So thank you so much. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Jess. I'll clarify that I'm the Program Coordinator for the Characterising South Australia's cover team. So, in the Geological Survey, we have a number of teams within the geoscience group that do a lot of the scientific research, I suppose, with geology and geophysics. So I'm just one of them. But thank you very much for the invite today. I've really enjoyed tuning in the past to some of the geo hugs. I've missed a few recently because I was doing field work, but I think I've got a good excuse. So I'll present today on some of that work I've done. It's a great honour to be asked to present, and I really hope I can give you an insight into the great things happening at the Geological Survey of South Australia. And I'm a geologist, and I've been with the survey now for over 2 years. And before that, I've worked with companies, exploration companies in Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia and WA. And when I was doing my PhD, it took me to the Northern Territory in Western Australia. So I was working in the Tanami. And I've even worked in Tanzania and East Africa as part of that PhD. So I've been very lucky to have been able to see some beautiful parts of the world. So I am a bit of a cover lover. The cover is something we'll talk a little bit about later in this, but I know you've already had a talk from my colleague Carmen Krapf previously. And so Carmen talked a lot about some of the cover and some of the ways we can explore and use our understanding of the cover for groundwater resources. And I'll be talking a little bit today about some of the geochemistry and how we use the stuff that covers the earth, some of those crystalline bedrock and basement rocks that everyone really loves to see, how we can actually use that to look at those rocks as well. So as an analogue or an expression of that geology further below the surface. So today I'm just going to give you an update on the Geological Survey of South Australia, our key projects, and then the second part of the talk will be looking at Ultrafine project, our collaboration with CSIRO, and what that's about and why we're out there in the Gawler Craton anyway. For some of you who might not be aware, people tune in from all sorts of different parts of the world and exploration and mining industry. The Geological Survey is usually at a state or federal level, and we give an overview of the geology of the state or of Australia. So we're within the Department of Energy and Mining, and which is a state government department in South Australia, and we really exist to collect, manage and deliver information and knowledge of the state's geology and mineral prospectivity. So we're supporting companies and we're helping to decrease the risk in exploration when they come to the state. We're giving them a chance to know a little bit about the state before they come and invest money. And also we're using that information for different types of regulation purposes. We assist with other state departments and really we're the custodians of the state's geology. So it's a pretty important role, and we have a lot to do with a lot of different projects across the state and within Australia and internationally as well. At the moment, we've got lots of projects happening, and I just wanted to give this slide. It's actually a snapshot from SARIG, which is the South Australian Resource Information Gateway, and that's an online platform for exploring the state's geology. You can find out all the information that we have, the geophysics, and you can also pull up, one of the screens is this one here, and that will show you all the different projects, where we are, and it gives you links to information, reports, things like that. As you can see, we've got a lot of things happening. The geochemistry projects, so this Central Gawler Ultrafine is one of those projects. And also as part of that, there's lots of geological mapping involved, so there's as well. All right, so I don't know, I can use my mouse. And so then, so the Gawler Craton's in here. So we're going to tune in a little bit to some of these projects. Some of the different things we're doing across the state include geophysics, like the Gawler Craton seismic tomography. We've just wrapped up on the Explore SA Gawler Challenge, which I'll talk about just briefly, which is pretty amazing for the state. There's some amazing targets generated and some really interesting processes around data science and geology, which we'll be looking to take and improve on and utilise on some different areas, or to use those targets for our own project work. The ICG Knowledge Cube is ongoing and understanding these big iron ore copper gold projects that we have here in South Australia. The Curnamona Minex CRC and NDI area has got the Curnamona Cube, which has just been announced also, and I'll touch on that briefly. And the sedimentary copper mineral systems of the Stew itself, which is a project just starting in a collaboration with CSIRO, and that's going to be really interesting, some of those ways they're going to explore the basins where copper is potentially hosted in South Australia. Another big thing, the grey areas on both sides of the state there, it's not blocked out because we don't want to think about the borders. They're the areas that we're going to be collaborating with the Geological Survey New South Wales, Geological Survey Queensland, NCGS, and also the Geological Survey WA, and working with Geoscience Australia. It's going to be really great to see what happens in these spaces. We're going to be looking at collaborating and really exploring groundwater energy and minerals and potential in these areas. So, and that's an extension of the Exploring for the Future project that was up in Northern Territory in WA. Didn't touch on in there briefly, but a lot of the work that we're doing in South Australia and in the Gawler has been generated through the rollout of the Gawler Craton Airborne Survey. So I know Carmen talked a little bit before about generating geophysical data through airborne sensors, and the information that we can collect can be used for mapping. The GCAS program, all the information is available online. You can go check it out at that link below. I'm happy to post some links later. If you just Google that, you'll find it. Really, what's the big outcome of that has been new interpreted basement geology in the western and central Gawler Craton, and just increasing that mineral prospectivity. A lot of the work we've been doing in the ultrafine survey we'll talk about, and beyond, we'll be doing as the next steps, we'll be utilising this data as our base map on where we might be able to look for more areas of interest in the Gawler Craton based on geology and geochemistry, where these things both really intersect. The Curnamona Cube is a massive project with Allscope, NCRIS, University of Adelaide, collaborators as well. The Geological Survey of South Australia, and I think GSNSW plus other stakeholders are all involved in this. It's going to be a collaborative research project. So if you look at the map here, we've got Curnamona province has been outlined, and you can see that all these triangles are actually points, survey points. They're going to be running magnetotelluric survey, so deep crustal imaging using geophysical instruments to understand the Earth, as well as passive seismic and other things. There'll be companies that are helping out with this as well, and they're working with companies. It's going to be a really exciting project. As you can see, it moves across into New South Wales as well. So it's a really big area. It's a really interesting area geologically. So getting some answers for that would be great. Minex CRC is our big project at the moment here in the Geological Survey of South Australia. We have 10 years and we have $5 million invested in this project. It's really a big collaboration with research institutes such as with the universities, and there's also project partners, and it's really the aim of it is to extend our understanding of exploration through the cover. So we talk about cover a lot. It's in a lot of areas, it can be up to 500 metres to 1,000 metres thick. In the Murray Basin, it gets to about 1,200 metres in the deepest parts. So this is an area that we don't have a lot of information about the rocks below the basin sediments, and also understanding the basin sediments as we drill down through them should be a focus as well. We have new interpreted basement geology maps that have just come out, as you can see here, and we've also just released the areas that we're going to be working in. So on the left-hand side, in the purple is areas that we'll be looking at. So this area, you can't pick up tenements. This is for the Geological Survey South Australia government to explore in. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the drill program will be like and what sort of insights we can have into the rocks below the cover, and also about the cover in this area too, to try and understand the complex geological history and also the mineral prospectivity of the area. So because we've been pushing through with this Minex NDI, the phase one was the production of quite a lot of information about the Delamerian based on what we already know. So a lot of work's been done already with the South Australian Drill Corps reference library to pull out the drill holes and have a look at them and to start revisiting the geology of the area, geochemistry, the age dating of these rocks to really understand it. Not many drill holes will go much into the basement rocks unless there's something there to look at. So it's been a really big task to pull together this Delamerian igneous basement volume, and also the Atlas of Geoscientific and Exploration Data. They're both amazing pieces of work. And if you are interested in understanding really complex the geology of the Murray Basin, it's a great place to look, and especially the South Australian side, it's going to be giving you a really good oversight of what products there are available and what data there is available already for you to pull together yourself and have a look at. Lots of geophysical products. So the AusLAMP resistivity model here. We've got reprocessed geophysical images. So often, you know, geophysical data is raw data and it gets processed. Now it's getting revisited and pulled together in different modelling techniques, and getting a really interesting resolution. And of course, there's ongoing work now to try and make that even better and make some even better products. And the Delamerian cover thickness has been revisited also, and magnetic source depth modelling products have been also updated. Lots of holes, 48 new holes have been logged, high logged. So high logging looks at the spectral information of a drill hole as you go down. So every centimetre it takes spectral information, and then we can create these spectral summaries. This is all available online. If you go through SARIG and any drill holes, you can look for actual drill holes with the National Virtual Core Library, and also on the right there, it shows the data updates that we've done. So just since the beginning of this year, there's been an increase of 56% of the amount of drill holes that are inside the SA geo data and available on SARIG lithology logs. So increased by 110%. So they've doubled the amount of lithology that you can look up. Downhole geochemistry, it's almost tripled the amount of downhole geochemistry that is actually available now for explorers and stakeholders to go and have a look at and download for themselves. And surface geochemistry is just phenomenal. Just over almost 60,000 new samples that have been added. So it's increased like three to four times. It's pretty amazing. So it's been a massive project, and it's really exciting to see what the phase 2 drilling is going to look like as we move forward, and then we're planning to do that in the new year. In case you've missed the news in the last 2 weeks, the Explore SA Gawler Challenge has been wrapped up. Winners announced that it was really amazing project. It was working with Unearthed to produce a project that looked at innovation through machine learning in exploration, and it was open data, open challenge, predicting new mineral prospects and new mineral deposits and prospectivity. Why the Gawler? Well, it's a region known for its copper and gold deposits, but there are many more other potential deposit types. And the Gawler South Australia competition group drew around 2,200 data specialists from more than 100 countries to interrogate all this new data, new and historical data that's held by the Geological Survey of South Australia across the Gawler Craton. We talked a little bit before about the Delamerian MinEx data that's been uploaded. I think it was at least as much or even more uploaded for Gawler too. So this year alone, we've just uploaded an amazing amount of data here at the Geological Survey of South Australia that's available now for people to use. It goes through the winners here. If you haven't had a chance to look at the winning submissions and look at the awards, they're all online at our YouTube channel and just through our web pages. It's really interesting to watch the videos and see how different people, different groups have done different things. A lot of the data that was cleaned originally and the data packages are all available too. So if you wanted to at least just pull together some Gawler data, it's a great place to go. So if you're really chomping at the bit after seeing my talk today, you'll be able to go and download some of this information yourself, some of the data packages, and have a play. As a run-on from the Gawler Challenge, has just been a recent announcement for the Economic Benefit Growth Fund to give the Geological Survey of South Australia an additional $5 million to flesh out the winning concepts into prospects for exploration companies to make next big discovery. So really, you know, as I said at the start, the role of the Geological Survey is to really reduce the scale, make it easier for companies to come here and have ready to go target areas, work's already been done in an area to make it more prospective, and to really generate that interest for investors as well. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with this new Gawler Kraton phase 2, I suppose, and looking at the next steps to utilise data science learnings and targeting to apply in real time. So it's going to be a really interesting time at the survey, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of the next year or two as we push through with this Gawler SA, Explore SA Gawler Challenge information. So I guess it's a good time now to talk about, why the Gawler and why do we keep going back? The Tarcoola and Gawler region have smaller deposits, so where are the big ones? I think that's the big question. The Tarcoola region, I think gold was discovered in the 1880s in that area. I mean, if you're not aware, big transcontinental railways go through there, so up to Perth and across to Darwin. They both go right past Tarcoola, so it's a really interesting area. It's been well traversed over time, and the Tarcoola battery there on the left was around from the turn of the 20th century. And obviously, this is a picture on the right there as some survey geologists out and about in the field. And, people have been walking this ground for a very long time. We found a fair bit at surface, but as we know, over 70% of Australia is covered by some sort of transported or weathered materials that makes it very hard to see through cover. And that's why we're sort of spending this time and money to keep going and looking back in these areas. Because the Gawler Kraton is renowned as host to the world-class Olympic Dam copper gold uranium deposit, the fertility of the Kraton has been reconfirmed. As you look through Carrapateena and other areas, they're on the eastern edge, but we still know that there's a lot there to be found. Exploration has identified significant resources, hypogene and intrusion-related gold, heavy mineral sands, especially if you go over to the western side as you go into the Fowler domain with Iluka, and there's iron ore, and the area is established as prospective for lead, zinc, copper, gold, nic, and sandstone-hosted uranium. So there's a whole host of things that we're really interested in the area. So, this is a simplified geology of the Gawler Kraton. For the people that aren't familiar with the area, you can see that there's, we've got Archean rocks through to Neo-Archean and Mesoproterozoic, Neoproterozoic units as well. We've got these intrusions like the Hillsborough Suite, St. Peter's Suite, Tunkilia Suite through there, and then a lot of it area has the Gawler Range volcanics on top of it. And there's been a whole lot of deformation and big events that have really crisscrossed the area and mucked around with the geology to create an area of real exploration potential because of these really complex geology there. There's ongoing work, obviously, with the Geological Survey of South Australia to increase the basement interpretation and understanding of the complex interplay between these things. And I guess what's been the emphasis for the last year and a half since I've been with the survey is how we can build on the new geophysics and interpreted geology for new ideas and targets in the surface and in the cover. So how can we understand the cover materials or the regolith to help explorers or to value add these areas to create an area of interest in the Gawler Kraton and better understand how the basement geology or cover geology can be expressed through surface and be readily sampled by someone like myself or exploration companies as well. But I mean, just in case people, it's been a new concept for some. What is regolith? It's everything from fresh rock to fresh air. And as I said before, more than 70% of Australia is covered with regolith. It's a great picture here from my PhD supervisor and former colleague, Steve Hill, which really shows that the landscape's quite complex. You go out there and, sometimes you can see hills poking out the surface, but what you do see often is a lot of this soils of sediments, sand dunes, very different cover sediments, basin sediments on top of what could be your crystalline basement. And you can have mineralization below surface that does sometimes get expressed through cover. It might get cut off. You could have types of basement rocks or limestone or other rocks that cover that will make it hard for that expression to get to the surface. And you can have plants and groundwater moving through and pulling stuff up to the surface as well that will create a bit of an expression or anomaly or a signal, as it's good to say now these days, at the surface. It's a very complex interplay. So I think that's why regolith is so fascinating and so interesting, because it is not just cut and dry, go out and sample a rock. I mean, you really need to think about all aspects of the landscape when we're talking about the regolith. It's not just the soils, it's not just the plants, it's not just the groundwater, it's actually this interplay between them all. I've chucked up here just a bit of a diagram, not to confuse you, but we often talk about the critical zone sometimes. In the Northern Hemisphere, the regolith sort of research is really instead expanded to critical zone, where it's this complex interplay between everything in the near surface, where water, rock and air interact with life, and it has a focus more on the ecosystems. And obviously anthropogenic influence is a big thing. So not that they're mutually exclusive, but we find that the regolith work in Australia is a bit more of a mineral exploration context, at least how it's used today, that has a legacy in landscape and soil, geomorphology and understanding the environment. So it's just another tool that we can use to try and understand the earth, really. So how do we sample regolith? I think that's probably what I'd really like to talk about today. Now that I'm sort of moving to the second part of the talk, I think it'd be really great to explore, just what is exploration sampling, or what is regolith sampling. So we have different approaches for different scales. When we get to geochemistry and trying to understand the underlying rock, you can see here in this picture, you've got mountains sticking out in the background. I'm standing on a hill, so it's probably, got like weathered rock, and then out in front of us is this big basin where you've got stream sediments, and you might have all these different depressions and alluvial fans and a whole lot of things happening in the landscape. And trying to work out what's going to be the best thing to sample in this area can be really hard. Geochemical baselines are something that will give people an understanding of just like the background across an area. In a lot of countries, they have established geochemical baselines just to even understand pollution change over time. As you might have heavy industries move out of an area, environmental monitoring purposes. And Australia has its own geochemical baseline survey that happened not that long ago, the National Geochemical Geochemistry Sampling NGSA, I just got an acronym, that's done by Geoscience Australia, and that was using overbank sediment. So just basically picking a drainage network, picking a point right at the middle of it to get a good representative sample, and just doing that for all of Australia. So it's a pretty amazing piece of work. But we need to think about what do exploration companies need and what do environmental consultants and other users need as well. And that's when we start talking about scale. So regional, sort of nationwide scale is fine, but that's just one point in this whole area. But you can see that there's a lot going on across this whole area. We might want to have more detail. So in my role at the survey is how do we design something that will take in a lot of this information and produce a really good survey that will tell us more about the landscape and tell us more about the rocks beneath it. In the olden days, there's a lot of digging and hoeing and calcrete sampling, like at the top left, that actually might be some sort of chim sampling, so using electromagnetic sampling of the soil. Lots of sieving, lots of auguring, which is that sort of funny looking device there. And there's different ways of getting information about the soils. But myself and my collaborators at CSIRO really wanted to find something that would be quick and easy. And it's been tried and tested on the Kumpana Geochemical Survey, which was undertaken a couple of years ago now. They used a helicopter, so if you're going up and down a helicopter, you need a very small amount of material because you're going to end up weighing the helicopter down pretty fast. So how does this work? How do we use geochemistry? Really what we're looking to do is have a sufficient expression of subsurface chemistry. So what's going on below the surface? Can we pick that up in whatever we sample at the top? So my PhD, I was sampling termite mounds, like on the left here. And we know that termites were really good at this because they were picking up the material that was getting, they were mixing the material in the soils at the surface, but they were also going down to groundwater, and there's other sorts of complex things happening too. They're also eating the vegetation and bringing that back into the mound too. So you're getting a really mixed response. A lot of work that Steve Hill's has done in the past, and his students has been looking at biogeochemistry of river red gums, for instance, and other different types of trees. And there you've got the tap roots tapping in, and some really great examples in that research about really just picking up, unknown mineralisation just below the surface, and quite blind, and the trees were picking up this response through their tree roots and sucking up that water and sucking up those nutrients. So it's pretty great stuff. Also, it's pretty low impact. We have really great labs here now in Australia. We can still send things off overseas if we'd like, but there are some great labs that will handle biogeochemistry and other low-level soil sampling and other things. And all you really need is a backpack, gloves, you might need some clippers, calico bags, and off you go. Okay, so some of this recent work that's been happening, we want to do geochemistry in an area, but first we really need to constrain what the regolith geology is at surface, what the surface geology is. My colleague Carmen Krapp's done an amazing job with, done a collaboration with CSIRO and produced this Gawler Regolith map, which has provided a really consistent baseline data set for mineral exploration, and the geochemical sampling and interp of a lot of the areas in my project will tie in with this regolith map. It's going to be really great. As you know, also really amazing for land use and groundwater. This area is crisscrossed by paleochannels as well, and it just gives you a really good insight and visual detail about the complex interplay that's in this landscape, and how just sampling one thing at surface might be affected by other things that are going on below and above the surface. Okay, so ultrafines. I think a few people might be tuning in to find out about this. If you've not already heard from my collaborator Ryan Noble from CSIRO, the ultrafine workflow is pretty amazing. It's being put together in conjunction with LabWest, and it's actually like a product that you can select when you submit your samples to the lab. It's really looking at merging past regolith sampling with updated analytical techniques and machine learning. Soil geochemistry is a pretty standard exploration technique that works great in shallow cover and has been used extensively across Australia and other countries, but it hasn't really changed much in 20 years. So CSIRO have worked to develop this workflow that improves the results that you get in covered environments. So it really it decreases dilution from quartz, and you can see the trace elements in areas of deeper cover. They've got some really great examples. If you just Google this, you'll see even the website LabWest has some of the studies. It's really great, quite fascinating. The workflow really integrates spectral mineralogy, pH, EC, electrical conductivity, and particle size, and will be in this project especially, will be integrated with machine learning algorithms and integrated with outputs with existing Geological Survey South Australia data. So regolith landfall maps, radiometrics, digital elevation maps, all sorts of models, all sorts of things. So the product itself, instead of just getting a whole pile of numbers on a sheet, you'll actually be given a whole lot of information about the geochemistry, mineralogy, the soil conditions when you sample, because they'll measure all those things in the soils before they send them off to go through the digest and everything else. So it's really great, because often, no matter who collects it, you're not going to collect that information in the field. So to have that information collected by the lab just means that you have a better control of how you model that data and how that data really sits in as a whole when you compare these big data sets. Here's a really complex picture where you can see the workflow, whether you're going from soils or you've got some bulk samples. You can send that off to the lab. It'll get crunched with the cloud. Cyro has this ultrafine and AI. They'll pull all these data sets together. That's part of the package when you send your soil data off, whether you're a company or researcher or whatever. And they'll pull all that information together and have these outputs looking at elements by regolith type, which is pretty amazing. So all the different samples that are on a certain regolith type, they'll group them and see, you know, the comparison. Any outliers could be because of mineralogy, could be because of something happening below the surface, so you can go and explore those. It'll pull it in with regolith type, overall uncertainty and anomalies and things like that. So it's a really great way of being able to have someone else interrogate and interpret the data for you instead of just it come back in a blob. We know that, you know, companies have less and less time to do more and more things, just like the surveys or any other employers. So it's a really great way of getting a bit more information from your soil data. And it's not a lot; it's only a small amount, as you'll see. Some specky pictures. So part of the Gawler ultrafine, what we wanted to do was actually smart sampling. So instead of pulling out a grid and just driving around to the grid, which actually can be very hard when it comes to landholder or land access. You know, you're not always going to be picking your way through blue bushes all day when you've only got 1 week to complete a project and 150 points. You really need to economise your time. So I basically said, I want all these points to be on a road so we don't have to go off track. So we started planning that. We were able to pull in all these different data sets like the regolith depth from different parts of TERN, so Terrestrial Ecosystem Research Network. ASTA data, so the airborne airborne data. We were able to, you know, this tells us different things about the transported materials, including paleochannels, and looking at hematite versus goethite with this ferric oxide lay here from ASTA data. So just pulling different parts of the landscape together, they'll be able to layer all these different data sets and sort of say which points can we group. So we have this 1 point represents a whole pile of area, and so on until we've got a less, got basically have a whole lot of sites that mostly represent every aspect of the landscape that we really want to try and at least measure at this regional context. So it's a really big area. So not having to sample 1,000 points, and we can only sample 150 instead, but still get a really similar model is going to be really interesting for us. This was this was trialed at Campana. They had a grid, they went to every point on a helicopter, but they also had to play around with, you know, if we only went to these points, would this model still look the same, or would the geochemistry still look the same when we plot it all up? And so that they've already got this experience, so we really want to try and test that even more with this project and this collaboration. So a big shout out to Ryan Noble and Dave Cole here for a lot of the work that they've put into this project. So obviously we ended up having to do the field work because they couldn't come across from WA due to COVID. Our fieldwork was delayed until August this year because of that, and so you know, we've still been able to pull together a really great project. Again, here this is the radiometrics, and again you can see how that changes across the area, and you know, each of these points has been selected to try and, you know, work out how we can represent all the different data layers. I think there was about 12 layers that went into the modelling and surface geology as well. All right, so this is what we ended up with at the end after having a bit of a muck around with the data, making sure that we're sticking to tracks, and we also had to play around with it between our first and second visits to the area, just to try. A lot of the tracks that are reported to be there are not often there. So we really want to expand to create a regional data set. The map that Carmen's produced is a bit of a smaller area. We really wanted to push it out to this larger context to get a big picture for the area. We were constrained by access along the existing tracks due to time constraints, and we had grand plans to cover the area and had a good window for access with the Woomera prohibited area. So this area itself, for context, we have, this is Glendambo here, Olympic Dam is over to the east from here, and the Woomera area is, Woomera town is to the east as well. This big red blob is the Defence Continuous Use Zone, and then they have these different Use Zone 1 and 2, and plus the infrequent zone around in the orange. So basically the Defence has access to this land, and you need to get permits if you're working in this area. There's signs everywhere. Often this land, it gets closed for access. Even the landholders have to move out when they want to use it for tests, missiles, other things like that. As you can see, there's lots of bunkers in the area. So anywhere north of that sort of line where you can see the Woomera prohibited area zones, that they'll have these bunkers. They don't use these anymore, these bunkers, but they were used till quite recently. For anyone that living on the farm, they would get a phone call, they put a siren on, and then everyone would have to go into the bunker and wait out the test. So I've worked previously on the eastern side of the Stuart Highway, and I've seen some pretty awesome rocket gardens where landholders have just collected all the rockets from their pastoral lands and put them all together. Anyway, so that made it really interesting for us as well. Okay, so talking about the fieldwork, we finally made it up there in August, start of August this year, after being delayed due to COVID, and waiting to make sure what we can do. Instead of having a whole host of us coming from CSIRO and the Geological Survey, it was just ended up being 4 of us, although 5 of us for the first bit, from the Geological Survey. We stayed at Kingunya, and quite luckily, we're up there twice. We're up there for the full moon both times. It's a beautiful little spot. And the best thing about it probably is that I was able to introduce, maybe not convert, I'm not sure, some basement geologists to regolith. And I reckon they enjoyed the experience. So both the people in the picture here are hardened structural geologists and geochronologists, and I think they liked it. So I think they liked a bit of a change of scenery. We did a lot of driving, and we started to get a good system and worked on those digging skills. So this is my colleague, so I should say in the previous slide, whoops. We've got Mark Pauly and Anthony Reid. So thank you very much to those two. Oops. And Liz Jagodinsky here. It's been really a pleasure to go out in the field with them. They're all very good field geologists, and so it was much as a learning experience for me about how to do government field work as well. So they did a really amazing job of guiding me through that, and also getting us a lot of samples collected. These are the sample packets for ultrafine, about 200 to 300 grams each usually. We had a really fancy QR code that we could use, and we used notebooks with the FAMES app, which has been developed by CSIRO and some other users, which is really great. So you point the camera, the tablet at the QR code, it comes up. So a lot of fields are auto-entered. You've got GPS coordinates you can add in, and all sorts of things, and add in your data. So it makes it a lot easier than scratching into a notebook or anything like that. To actually collect data as you go. You can take your photos, they're all tagged. It's really great way of doing field work. We had great weather. We had beautiful sunrises, sunsets. Got a bit cold for a while there. And of course the wildflowers were out. It was pretty amazing to just be driving around and seeing sturt desert peat everywhere. But then it also rained after about the 3rd day. And anyone who's worked out in the field or out in these areas know that as soon as it rains, you're either getting out or you wait it out, and we waited a bit too long, so we had to wait it out. And you can't really move around the tracks once it rains, especially some of the station tracks we were going through. So we got to enjoy a day at Kingunya, the local pool, the local horses, and we decided to head back up again a few weeks later when it had dried out. So they did get about 40, 50 mils of rain. It was quite a lot of rain. So we went back out. We had better weather this time, and we went at the start of September. And just here we can see we're sort of picking the sites that we want to go pick. So there's the road there. We sort of walk off the road a bit. We'd find a spot we want to do our soil sampling. Obviously there's a bit of animals and stuff around the area. We'd pick the site, we'd take a photo, we pick the plants we want to sample as well with the biogeochemistry. And off we go. So we're sieving. Didn't always take more than like one of us, but we sort of divvy up the jobs, and then we'd once we were done sieving, we would just pull all the gravels back over and rehab the site. What I really loved seeing is just how the soils from across the landscape and geology can be so varied, and you can spend so much time looking at the satellite image, and navigate, be working around navigating for tracks and trying to look at things in ArcGIS. But when you go out in the field, you get to see this come to life. It's amazing. You see such a myriad of soils and lags and types of samples that you're going to be collecting. As you can see, even in the sand to pebble size fraction in these photos, you see all different types of sizes of material. There's a real difference in types of rocks and minerals presented. And this is one of the reasons we sieve. You don't just scoop and chuck in a bag. You can see there's so many different lags that it's just going to throw your chemistry right out. So what you're doing, you sieve just to remove this coarser portions and the fractions, just so you would get the ultrafine and fine material. So a lot of sieving happens at the labs, obviously, to get the ultrafine, which is less than 75 micron. But at the same time, you're just getting rid of all the stuff to start with. You'll get a bit more bulk sample, which you can split or reuse and things like that as well. So all of this material here is probably going to be, pulled together. I'll be relating a lot of this to the maps that have already been produced by Carmen Krapf with the Regolith maps, both at Tarcoola scale and statewide scale. And that's going to be really interesting to sort of, constrain what we see with that, it's actually fact checking all of those maps, confirming, the great mapping that's been done, and actually just really adding to that value of that data and adding to the examples of how the landscape varies and how the geophysical response might vary because of that, especially when it comes to radiometrics and ASTA. This is all to do with the stuff that you see at the surface. So I think it's going to be a really great little side project there. Value adding is really important when you work with a geological survey. You go out for a week and you want that data you collect to last for at least 6 months to a year if you can, and get as much as you can out of it. So I wanted to, wondered how we could add value to the soil data. The actual program was really just about the soil collection. We worked to pull together a proposal to also analyse the vegetation. One thing, we could go out there and sample it. That was quite easy to go out and sample this vegetation. So now we've got the expenditure as well to pull this through the lab. So what we'll be doing is sending all this off to the lab as well. You spend all that time lugging all your material out there. It doesn't take much to bring an extra red bag as well as your shovel. And in that red bag, we'll have all that we need to actually do the vegetation sampling. And CSIRO were great. They actually packaged the soil packets, which is the little paper bags, with the calico bags, and they're all numbered the same, so they're all related to each other. It was really great to be able to do that. It's a real pleasure to go out there and have all that ready to go in just 5 minutes at each site, and off you go to the next one. So really, the plant assemblages can really tell us a lot about the regolith, landforms and soils, and we know that they're linked to geology. So all of the plants that we see out there, they have these geobotanical associations we like to talk about, where the actual plants often have a preference for where they're growing. We know plants in our gardens can be really finicky about, lime soils or acid soils, things like that. It's the same with these plants out there. But we would be linking them to sort of regolith or geological terms. We know that a lot of the area, is some plants don't like to get their feet wet. You're not going to find them anywhere near the salt lake. Some plants like to have really sandy soil and good drainage. So not saying, you could try and do a bit of mapping by plants. It's one aspect of regolith as well. And it's definitely been done in other parts. And it's just one of those bits of information that's really great to collect. And again, confirm where you are in the landscape, confirm what you might be seeing in the satellite data. And obviously we can use that to back up our soil geochemistry as well. So we can collect the chemistry of the plants. We send them off just as we would to for the soils to a commercial lab like LabWest or AMDEL or anywhere, Bureau Veritas, Genesis, anything. So we really can, they can all handled by geochemistry really these days. It's quite, common for companies to be doing this and others. And we look for major and trace elements just the same as we would for soils. So if anyone, if I'm sounding really interesting to a lot of people here and you don't know much about regolith research, then I just thought I'd do a shout out to the CRC Lean website. It's still active. That was the Cooperative Research Centre for Landscapes, Environment and Mineral Exploration. Campana geochemistry reports and a lot of the more recent work that the survey has done are online. If you would Google that, MESA Journal, or on our webpage. And of course, the Regional Biogeochemical Survey of the Eucla Basin, South Australia, which was work that was being done by Helen Waldron and Colin Dunn, Steve Hill and Steve Hall. And we were right in the area that they had done this field work. And of course, we're going to be, you know, leaned heavily on the work that they've done for this really, really long geochemical transect across the state. And just a lot of the early work they did in the plant selection and the geochemical responses of the plants are all in that report book. In case you're interested, I thought I'd just talk about the plants that we were sampling. So you saw that we were sampling different types of soil and just calling it soil. But with the plants, we actually are able to mostly tell the plants apart. And so we can kind of, at the moment, we still really do separate plant species when we start talking about the geochemical results. We often group them by species. So I think my grand dream perhaps one day would be to have enough data that we can try and see if there is a species difference, or whether we can just bucket everything based on whether they have deep tap roots or if they have shallow tap roots and things like that, because they're probably the things that probably matter most, not necessarily, you know, the types of things that we're digging into. So something you might see if you've driven around a lot in South Australia is Bladder Saltbush. It covers like a fair bit of WA, New South Wales, everywhere else as well. It's fairly well grazed by sheep especially. And we found, you know, obviously the first time we went up to the area, they didn't have much rain previously. It was pretty sparse sometimes, very hard to find. And you could tell if you were near some stockyards or a dam as well, because you could see that a lot of it had been grazed. Yeah, so I've got some notes. It's usually found in grass plains or saltbush, bluebush plains, and it's often like a shrub you might see every so often in eucalypt, black oak and mulga woodland and shrubland. Pearl bluebush is a really, really easy one to pick. It's one of my favourites just for that, although it's really horrible to sample. It can get quite prickly and horrible. It's got really fleshy, blue, pearly, I guess, leaves. And so that's quite easy to spot in calcareous and sandy soils, and often extensive treeless areas or pure stands mixed with black bluebush or bladder saltbush. And it's pretty drought resistant, and it can be a useful fodder plant as well. So you can see it's fairly grazed. You had them in various sort of degrees of condition. So sometimes they'd be really plump and fresh and beautiful to sample, and other times they're really, you know, sticky and hard to sample. So you went through quite a lot of gloves for that. And just in case you're wondering why we have the gloves on, we're doing biogeochemistry, just in case you got sun cream on especially, but just lots of things that you might put on your face or rings or anything like that. Plants are really low level trace elements, so you need to make sure you're just not contaminating the plant that way. Another one that is really extensively sampled is black bluebush or Maireana pyramidata, and that's pretty distinctive as well. Very dark looking, often the flowers are quite dark as well. And that's pretty horrible to sample too, to be honest. It's not a good fodder plant, but they will eat it if they have to. So usually that's one that you'll see in the landscape as well. We also sampled Mulga and Mallee. We didn't sample much of Mulga or Mallee. We initially were just focusing on those on the pearl bluebush, black bluebush, and bladder saltbush. But then sort of towards the end, you just sample whatever was there, and sometimes you didn't have anything else except a Mulga. So I started sampling that. So we've got a few of those. These are all plants that have been sampled by companies. They've been sampled in research projects. It's like CRC Leam and DTCRC. So it's probably good to get some reference samples of those anyway to compare with other studies that have been done in the area. Sign of a good program is when your hotel room is covered in soil packets, like in this case, and all of the furniture is covered in drying saltbush or mallee or mulga. It's probably a good reason to sample mallee sometimes. That smells a lot nicer than the other plants. Get a good eucalyptus smell. Yeah, so we ended up with like quite a lot of samples collected. And obviously the next, we had 140 soil samples collected for ultrafine and about 180 vegetation samples collected as well. And they're going to be, a lot of these, the soils and the vegetation is going to be linked to previous CRC Leam, Geological Survey South Australia MinEx projects, because we did resample 3 of the Far West Biogeochemistry Survey sites. And because we were up there over 2 field trip times, so before it rained and then after it rained, we actually repeated a couple of those samples just to see the vegetation response had changed or the soils at all. So that's a big thing in biogeochemistry, is that you have a seasonality, or you have before rain, after rain type of effects in the vegetation. So it'd be interesting to see what comes of that as well. So pulling it all together, I've started, number crunching and looking at ArcGIS and displaying all this information. So in the background here, each of these dots is color coded, and that's the type of species that it is. Blue dots are pearl bluebush. You can see they're pretty widely distributed. So the next, and at the background is the Regolith Tarcoola map from Carmel Crap, and just seeing where we sampled in the landscape. Obviously there's, like, these plants are everywhere across the landscape, but whether there's, obviously some plants do relate more to certain regolith landform types, and whether there might be geology underlying that they might be related to as well. So I'll be looking at those sorts of things with this. We also have recently published Gold Mineral Systems and Exploration Gawler Craton by Justin Gunn, who came in and worked for us for a period of time and pulled together this really great resource, really looking at some of these gold mineral systems in the region. And so that'll be a great framework for sort of maybe taking this data and analysing it and looking at, relating it to certain gold systems perhaps as we move forward and have this big regional data set and looking at this regional information about different mineral systems or gold systems in the area. So next steps, we still need to, we're finishing up the collaboration with CSIRO. The samples have been sent off for analysis. And there'll be that interpretation that happens through the Ultrafine Plus project, and we'll be pulling together a paper for the end of the year, reporting on all these things, and also the data sets will be available via SARIG. At the moment, the vegetation samples are getting cooked away in the oven to dry them out, and I'll be prepping them next week and sending them off to the lab. We're going to be doing a lot of work to review and assess and find out what does the data actually tell us. What does it tell us about the landscape? What does it tell us about the regolith? And do we see any relationships with the underlying geology? The phase 2 Gawler, we really like to go back and continue the ultrafine sampling and vegetation sampling, but we might look to broaden the survey. So we've done a sort of central Gawler, like, we've got a lot of the northern Gawler, western Gawler and southern Gawler that we've not really touched on. These have all been areas of prospectivity and past research. And really keep pushing that link between, trying to link regolith rocks and plants in the area. All right, that's it.
Thank you so much. Well, everyone's welcome to jump off mute if you like. I have had a question come through on the chat. Did you record the soil pH and conductivity while sampling it?
Was that, sorry?
Sorry, did you record soil pH and conductivity while sampling it?
No, we didn't at the time, no. So I guess that'll obviously change as the samples are dried out and sent to the lab. But yeah, we don't do it at the time. It'd be interesting to do that at the time though. Yeah.
There's lots of thank yous, so pass them your way. Someone else has said, excuse my ignorance, but why calico bags rather than plastic for biosamples?
Good question. So even twiggy, dried out, drought resistant salt bushes and stuff still have a bit of moisture in the plants. If you put them in a plastic bag, they're just going to end up getting rotten and gross as obviously all the moisture comes out and they get heated up in the back of your car. So calico bags are really important just to let them dry out naturally. And also you don't want to pack them down too much. Because that way you can get a bit of mold and rot happening as well. You want to have them in pretty good condition when you dry them out and then send them off to the lab.
Yeah, I do have some questions for Anna. Thank you heaps, Anna. That was such a great talk. So with the Ultrafine Plus, I was just wondering what sort of mineralogy would be available? Do you know?
I think they do some work, just forgot the name, like a spectra. They do some atomic spectra work, I believe, whether it's similar to a PEMA machine, and so they can put that through and get a bit of that rudimentary mineralogy from the samples. Yeah. Okay. Okay, thanks for tuning in.
There's a few more coming through. Thank you, Anna. Excellent presentation. What is your recommendation for applying this practice in essential Andes, for example, Peru?
I guess it just depends if you've got an area that, if you've got, you know, shallow cover or if you've got thicker cover. I think, you know, if you've got an area of cover, then it's probably worth giving it a go. You could do some trial runs. If it's an area that you'd be tempted to do soil sampling anyway, then it's probably an area you'd want to do the ultrafine.
Do you think sampling ultrafine soil fractions near dirt roads has the potential for road dust contamination?
Yes, definitely. I think contamination is an issue across all sort of dusty areas. I think you're going to have contamination whether you're 10 metres from the road or 200 metres from the road. Really, if anyone's ever been out bush and seen a dust cloud move across the landscape, everything gets coated in that. For up to a kilometre away, I would have thought. So yeah, you're right. That's why we dig down the 10 centimetres. At least, you know, it could be dust contamination 10 centimetres lower, but that's why we don't just sample at the surface, we dig below 10 centimetres and pick up what's underneath. Same with the plants. You know, contamination's been studied quite a lot, both at mine sites and different transects and things. You know, they often found that there wasn't as much contamination, or you could correct it based on certain ratios. Certain elements will really stand out with contaminated in soils, especially any aeolian component. You can do a correction. So we definitely will look at that and look at that past research that's been done and make sure that we're not, you know, finding anomalies where there's actually contamination.
What about washing the plant material before you submit it?
Yeah, so lots of research has been done into that, especially by my colleagues when I was doing my PhD. Usually found that ultrasonic washing, things like that, it probably just, it wasn't much of a difference. Unless you got a sample that's really, really contaminated and coated, it's you're probably going to be negligible, the amount of the ultrasonic washing, whether it's going to help or not.
Right. And the dusty coating isn't a big part of the total volume of material, is it?
No, I think there's, I mean, I have to pull out some of the papers that have been done on that sort of contamination. And so Ben Vanderhoek's one person, he did his PhD just in the Tunkillia area south of Tarkul and Kingunya. And he did a bit of work on the contamination of the pearl bluebush especially. And I think he found, you know, you can kind of pick it up in some of the really microscopic work he did.
Right.
The overall effects, I think, is just as long as you had a bit of an understanding that there could be that contamination element, then it was something you could control for in your data. And I guess you could assume all the plants are contaminated in some way by dust and things like that, just naturally from the wind and things like that. Yeah.
Well, if you're doing this as a company, presumably any anomaly is going to get followed up.
Yeah, that's right.
One way or another, which would be a really good time to go out there and say, oh, geez, that bush really does look a bit dirty.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's true. Yeah, you know, it's a good point source, isn't it? Although, you know, wind-blown dust can travel quite far in Australia, so you probably don't want to have it too contaminated.
Anna, Xavier Moreau here. Quick question for you on the nature of the analysis you're running on the samples. A lot of the ore bodies that we're chasing tend to have very specific isotopic signatures, and yet we seem to stick to a lot of you know, sort of whole element analysis. And I was wondering if you are looking at least for major cation and anion, sort of looking at isotopic signatures on those, if you have enough concentrations of say, you know, potassium or iron and the like, and just to see if you can get more, I guess, unscrambling of the omelette than what we normally sort of get in terms of signal.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Definitely something to look into in terms of that geochemical analysis and how we interpret the results. I think that's why that, you know, when we collect the mineralogy data as well, that gives us a little bit more power. It's not just bulk, you know, analysis. We actually have an understanding of what the mineralogy of that sample was, and we can probably do a little bit more with it. That's a great point. Thank you.
Okay. And my earlier question on the bushfire history, I guess, is, you know, having spent a fair bit of time working in desert, is to do with metal uptake and the fact that, yes, there is a seasonal aspect to it, but it's not as pronounced probably as what you'd find in more humid sort of, you know, countryside.
Yeah.
And the fact that the period of accumulation has a big effect on the overall metal uptake.
Yeah. Sounds like I need to talk to you, Xavier.
Oh, no, it's actually more the other way around, but it's, you know, we haven't seen from the early days of you know, Paul Morris trying dye in WA to today. I've never seen any data on the isotopic sort of uptake and even fractionation by plants.
Yes.
And I think that would be a genuine sort of, you know, avenue to explore.
Yeah, I definitely have been exploring that, and I think a lot of the more recent isotope work that's been happening, especially groundwater and tracing through, say, like groundwater dependent, ecosystems. There's a lot of work being done just to understand that in South Australia, especially with the changing groundwater conditions in the Murray Basin and things like that. So it's definitely, I think that would be really exciting to be able to start studying the plant isotopes that way and relating them to the soil and groundwater chemistry and just seeing how they tap into it all. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm.
Thank you.
Hi, Anna. Josh Phillips here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for the talk. Really cool. I'm one of those people who's a bit new or distant from the regolith world. I'm just one of those people who just sees that stuff that gets in the way. So excuse my ignorance here, but I have a question about the ultrafine stuff.
Yeah.
Is there kind of like a target metal sweet that you're looking for in the ultrafine clays? Because presumably there's they don't all behave the same. Presumably there's some specific sweet that prefer to absorb to the clay fractions. And does that signature kind of change with your different soil types? So where you're getting laggy soils, presumably there's stuff that's going to preferentially go to all your little iron-coated piezoites and all that kind of stuff. And does that screw up your geochem signature for whatever it is you're looking for?
It's a good question. I guess it's why the actual lab. If you look at the Lab West website, they have it's like same as soils. It's a really extended suite for major and trace elements. So a lot of it might be below detection limit if you're picking an area that doesn't have those elements to start with. But it's a pretty extended suite, and they're working at bringing down the detection limits as well. But in terms of some soils, depending on the clay mineralogy of the area and what the soil profile is, you're not going to have some elements, I suppose, and that's probably why it's so important to get that regolith mapping done. It doesn't have to happen before, but after, and just have that as a context. I think most states now have their statewide regolith geological map, which is amazing to have as just that background information. And obviously, if you're going in for a more tailored survey, whether that's something that you might want to try and generate yourself, but that's why it's quite important to note the characteristics of the materials that you're collecting. Even if you're collecting the ultrafine, you can see fraction for each of those different soil types I had up before are going to be probably quite different just because of the lag that's sitting on top. There will be, a relationship between that lag and the ultrafines, you would think, or maybe that's something we need to investigate as well. But it's a really good question. It's the sort of thing that, we often are quick to put out dots on a map showing if something's anomalous or interesting and we want to go back to it. But, actually answering those questions is probably the most important thing for us to do with this data at this stage. Understanding those relationships.
Yeah, cool. So that's not well constrained yet. That's what I'm understanding.
I guess I'd like to think that that because the ultrafine process does look at the mineralogy and does look at the regolith information, so you'll get that as the package. Then you do get a little bit more information about that. But yeah, it's not complex. Not much more complex than that, and I think that would be up to the individual user to try and pull that information out. And I think it's a really great point, is that was probably the information that we need to pull out, especially with this project as we move forward, and as as some of the results of this is, how much dependence the results have on the type of regolith materials that the soil's been taken from, because that will affect the clay mineralogy probably, and therefore the result.
Josh, just to jump in there, if you run a principal component analysis on any of these data sets, you will see very clear groupings emerge, and that's a very good sort of early stage screening of I guess behavior, various analytes against different soil types.
Cool, thanks, mate. We'll do.
Anna, how well would you say trying to think of the right phrase, the whole business of characterizing regolith is in terms of being a useful tool? Looking at your photos of sites, there was some pretty clear sort of, this is something A here, here, and here, and that's something B. Do you think there's a lot of work to be done in improving how we characterize regolith?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, it's not as we know, even a geological unit isn't just like a uniform thing, and the geology, geochemistry, mineralogy stays the same along it. And so you have these, varying degrees of difference in it. I think any sort of surface exploration where you're drilling, 10 meters or 50 meters, you probably you're going to be trying to sample that cover. So you're going to need to characterize it a bit more than just, there's rocks there or there aren't. So I think that's quite important because, even if you were drilling 30 meters and you were getting some really interesting gold responses in this area, is that because it used to be a paleo channel flowing in from somewhere else, or are you on a paleo stream? Is it because you've had material moving across the landscape, or have you been in a hollow and the calcrete that you've sampling is actually, sucked up all this gold or other interesting things because it can. So I think that's quite interesting. I think that's important too. They're the things that will help you answer the questions you'll get from your results, I think. So I do think it's important that way.
Right.
Anna, one more question, if I can. The veg sampling that you conducted seemed quite extensive, and what sort of protocol did you follow to be able to compare like for like in terms of tissues or veg type that you were sampling on each of the different species? Yep.
So usually, like at the next step for this project, at least, I probably wouldn't look to dump everything into a data lake and just analyze it. I would keep it separated by species, and also, you'd only really compare black bluebush with black bluebush and pearl saltbush with pearl saltbush. That's where sometimes it can really break down, is that you go into an area and you don't have much of anything, so you might not be able to get enough data to be able to do, some of the statistical analysis that you've mentioned already. What my big dream would be is that we just get enough data eventually in South Australia. There's lots of research data already, but whether we just keep generating these sort of geochemical surveys within the survey itself, as we have these different project areas that we're interested in, and create just enough information that we've got across the state that we can start pulling, is there a big difference between salt bushes? If they're all salt bushes, it matter that one's like a bladder saltbush and something's a ruby saltbush or something like that. Because we did sample one of those. I think that would be really interesting. A lot of work's been done on different species at the moment. We keep them quite separate, but I think I know questions have been asked in the past about how we can compare. Can plant species be compared together? And I think at the moment we're probably just not confident to do that yet. Another thing that is probably even important in the types of plants that we sample, we don't just chuck the whole plant that we sample, so we clicked around the outside and gotten leaves and twigs and everything. We're going to be pulling that apart, so the leaves will get analysed separate to the twigs, and we'll compare them separately like that as well, just because a lot of the plants didn't have any leaves on them as well. We found a lot of twigs with analysis. Yeah, I think that would be the next steps, is just to have enough data in our data set to be able to do that and create that baseline study.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi Anna, I have a question if I may.
Yes.
This is Mehdi. I'm a exploration seismologist and based in Perth. I was looking at your database and I saw that you have a large seismic data set. And I was wondering what work have you done on seismic data set, and what is the plan for future, and how you use seismic for the purpose of regolith characterization?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I'm not involved myself in a lot of seismic work, but we do have the seismic tomography project that's just kicking off now. Due to COVID, that was put back a little bit, just we couldn't get the instruments and we couldn't get the people. But that's happening soon. That'll be happening across the Gawler. We also have the Kernamona cubes, which will be really looking at characterising the passive seismic, be looking at characterising the cover in the Kernamona. And we also have passive seismic programs that have started in the Delamerian NDI as well. So just watch this space, because hopefully by Christmas we've got some good data for you.
Well, thank you so much. I think we'll call it now. Been very generous with your time on a Friday afternoon, so thank you so much. And yeah, have a great weekend. Thanks everyone for joining. If you do have any more questions, please reach out and we can follow through up on that next week. But yes, thank you everyone. Thank you so much, Anna, and I'll speak to you
everyone.
soon.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.